Okay, we are now into the 15th session of the study of Zechariah, Haggai and Zechariah. We got tonight, and then next time will be our last one. And tonight we're going to look at chapters 10 and 11. Zechariah prophesies against the shepherds. Um, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but chapters 9, 10, and 11, I think, are one prophecy. And then I think chapters 12, 13, and 14 are another prophecy. And these are very difficult for me. These are probably more difficult than the other things we've looked at. I'm going to give you what I understand, show you some things that I feel good about, but there's a lot I don't quite comprehend in these chapters. One of the problems that I have with chapters 9, 10, and 11, and 12, 13, and 14 is that there is no date reference. In other words, I don't know when Zechariah prophesied these. Chapters 1 through 8, we know that we have dates given in relationship to the reign of King Darius, but we don't know about these chapters when this prophecy was given. And that kind of adds to make it difficult because I don't know the context of what's going on, so I have to kind of imagine why he's prophesying, what he's prophesying. So, just as a introduction here tonight, I'm putting this is what I call this is in your syllabus, by the way. We're on page 69. I'm calling this a speculative timeline because I really don't know. But here's the issues. Chapters 1 through 8 of Zechariah, we are given dates in relationship to the reign of Darius the Persian. So we can get an idea of when they occurred. We can see Ezra historically, what was going on with the rebuilding of the temple. So we understand that. However, chapters 9 through 14, there are no date references as to when these prophecies of the burden of Yahweh are given. Also, we don't know how old Zechariah was when he began prophesying. He could have been young. We just don't know. We don't have any dates to his age, how old he was when he started. And we don't know how old Zechariah was when he died. We don't know how long he lived. We don't know how long he continued to prophesy. And we don't know when he died. According to the book of Matthew, we have an idea of how he died, but we don't know when he died. So, based on the context of what we're going to look at tonight, I think it was a much later time than chapters 1 through 8. They've completed the building of the temple, and then I think these prophecies, I think, happened many years later, especially when we look at tonight, he's going to have some very confronting words for the leaders, the shepherds over Israel. And because of that, I don't think that Zerubbabel and Joshua were still around when he's prophesying what we're going to look at tonight. We know around 520 BC, the second year of Darius, is when he started prophesying in Zechariah 1. We know the 8 visions of Zechariah 1:7 through 6:15 were in the second year of Darius in the 11th month. That was encouragement to the rulers. We know from the context that Zechariah chapter 7 and 8, when they were questioning about fasting in the 5th month, occurred in the 4th year of Darius, which was halfway through the construction of this rebuilding of the temple. So that was around 518 BC. We know from Ezra 6 that the temple was completed in the 6th year of Darius, which was 516 BC. I then believe there's a long time between chapter 8 and chapter 9. I think that, especially because of the information we're going to look at tonight, I don't think Zerubbabel and Joshua were still around. And also, we looked at a little bit about what happened by the time Ezra arrived and Nehemiah and some of the really terrible things that the leaders were doing, which may be why what we're going to look at tonight, may be why Zechariah was murdered, according to what Jesus said. So we'll look into that. So I just put in here that these chapters were the burden of Yahweh, chapters 9 through 11 and chapters 12 through 14, these two prophecies. This first one, I don't know. I think the dates are unknown. I think it could be 20 to 50 years after the temple was built. Same thing with chapters 12 through 14. We just don't know. I think maybe they're 20 to 50 years later. We know from Matthew 23:35, according to the Gospel of Matthew, that Zechariah was murdered in the temple, probably during the reign of Xerxes, I imagine. But again, I don't know. That's all speculative. All we know is that Jesus said it, Matthew wrote it, that Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, was murdered in the temple. In 459 BC, at the 7th year of Artaxerxes, is when Ezra arrives. By the time Ezra got there, the priests were already marrying foreign wives. 446 is when Nehemiah arrives in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. By the time Nehemiah arrives, the former governors were laying burden on the people. The brothers were sold into slavery. The tithes were restored. There were mixed marriages. Even relative of Tobias or Sanballat, one of those, had a room in the temple itself. So that's why I think these are much later prophecies that we're looking at here. So let's get into this. I'll first going to go through chapter 10, read through it, talk about a few things. Then I'll read through chapter 11 and we'll look at some things. So here is chapter 10, Zechariah, verse 1. He says, ask rain from Yahweh at the time of the spring rain. Yahweh who makes the storm clouds, and he will give them showers of rain, vegetation in the field to each man. Verse 2. For the teraphim speak iniquity, and the diviners see lying visions and tell false dreams. They comfort in vain, therefore the people wander like sheep. They are afflicted because there is no shepherd. My anger is kindled against the shepherds, and I will punish the male goats. For Yahweh of hosts has visited his flock, the house of Judah, and will make them like his majestic horse in battle. From them will come the cornerstone, from them the tent peg, from them the bow of battle, from them every ruler, all of them all together. They will be as mighty men treading down the enemy in the mire of the streets in battle. And they will fight, for Yahweh will be with them, and the riders on horses will be put to shame. I will strengthen the house of Judah. I will save the house of Joseph, and I will bring them back, because I have had compassion on them. And they will be as though I had not rejected them. For I am Yahweh their God, and I will answer them. Verse 7. Ephraim will be like a mighty man, and their heart will be glad as if from wine. Indeed, their children will see it and be glad. Their heart will rejoice in Yahweh. I will whistle for them to gather them together, for I have redeemed them, and they will be as numerous as they were before. When I scatter them among the peoples, they will remember me in far countries, and they with their children will live and come back. I will bring them back from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria, and I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon until no room can be found for them. So they will pass through the sea of distress, and he will strike the waves of the sea, so that all the depths of the Nile will dry up, and the pride of Assyria will be brought down, and the scepter of Egypt will depart. And I will strengthen them in Yahweh, and in his name they will walk, declares Yahweh. So what does this mean? So here's the first 10 verse 1. It says, ask rain from Yahweh at the time of the spring rain. Yahweh who makes the storm clouds, and he will give the showers of rain, vegetation in the field for each man. Now, when I read this, it sounds to me like this is a continuation of what we looked in chapter 9. And I think it is. I think that's actually, to really understand this, you need to go back to what we looked at the end of the last session, chapter 9. So we'll begin reading from the last words in chapter 9. In chapter 9, starting in verse 11, he said, "As for you, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. Return to the stronghold, O prisoners who have the hope. This very day I am declaring that I will restore double to you. For I will bend Judah as my bow, and I will fill the bow with Ephraim. And I will stir up the sons, O Zion, against your sons, O Greece, and I will make you like a warrior's sword. Then Yahweh will appear over them, and his arrows will go forth like lightning, and the Lord Yahweh will blow the trumpet, and will march in the storm winds of the south. Yahweh of hosts will defend them, and they will devour and trample on the sling stones, and they will drink and be boisterous as with wine, and they will be filled like a sacrificial basin, drenched like the corners of the altar. And Yahweh their God will save them in that day as the flock of his people, for they are the stones of a crown sparkling in his hand. For what comeliness and beauty will be theirs! Grain will make the young men's flourish, and new wine the virgins. Chapter 10, verse 1. Ask rain from Yahweh at the time of the spring rain. Yahweh, who makes the storm clouds, and he will give them showers of rain, vegetation in the field to each man. See how that comes right off of chapter 9? I think this is, again, God saying what he's going to do for his people and how he is going to take care of them. And one thing, especially as we go into this chapter, what is spoken in chapter 9, verse 16, it says, and Yahweh their God will save them in that day as the flock of his people, where he is comparing himself as the shepherd over the house of Israel, and they are his flock. And he has shepherded them and will take care of them and will gather them together, and he will bless them in what they do. That, I think, is where chapter 10, verse 1 is. I think, really, if you would have put a chapter division, it should have come at verse 2, because now the tenor of what he's saying changes. Zechariah 10, verse 2 says, for the teraphim speak iniquity, and the diviners see lying visions and tell false dreams. They comfort in vain. Therefore the people wander like sheep. They are afflicted because there is no shepherd. See, Yahweh was shepherding them, but here he's actually speaking to leaders, and we'll look at this closely. Now, if you're like me, the first thing I ask when I read this is, what's a teraphim? What does this teraphim mean? The word is teraphim. In the Hebrew, it's teraphim. And the NASB, RSV, REV all use the word teraphim. The King James Version and the New International Version translate this as idols. The NASB, ESV, NET, and the New Catholic Bible, Complete Jewish Bible, translate it as household idols or household gods. There's 3 stories, if you're interested in teraphims, there's 3 stories in the Bible about a teraphim or a household god. And you can be found, one is in the record of Rachel back in the book of Genesis. You remember she was hiding her father Laban's household god, and she sat on the camel and wouldn't get up and was holding the god there. Then there's the really strange record in the book of Judges 17 and 18 about a teraphim or the household idol of the man Micah in the book of Judges 17 and 18. And then also, if you remember, when David was running from Saul, his wife Michal, who was Saul's daughter, was covering up. She put a teraphim in the bed and covered it with a sheet to disguise David was sleeping. So those are 3 places in the scripture where a teraphim is used. Hosea 3:4 says that the Israelites will live many days without a king or a prince, without a sacrifice or sacred stones, without an ephod or a teraphim. As in the Micah story, the teraphim is closely associated with the ephod. Both are mentioned elsewhere in connection with divination or divining, getting divine information. Spiritualism really is what it is. The plural word, unknown derivation, used in the Old Testament to denote the primitive Semitic house gods whose cult had been handed down to historical times from the earlier period of nomadic wanderings. The translation of the term teraphim by the Greek versions, as well as use in the scriptures, gives an excellent idea of the nature of these symbols. Thus, Aquila renders the word by figures, the Septuagint in images, the Ezekiel carved images, and Zechariah by oracles, and in Hosea, manifest objects. There to the right on this picture, that is from Wiki Commons. It's in the public domain. This was found somewhere in Israel. It was dug up a teraphim, a Semitic from the Canaanite land. That's what a teraphim is. It was these idols. So one thing, before I forget about it, one thing that caught my attention with this was I was taught at one time that after Israel was in captivity 70 years, and once they came back to the land, that they never got back into idolatry. Well, this kind of rejects that thinking, because here we are, the temple's been rebuilt, they've been there now, they've been back, it's been 70 years, they're back in the land, they have a temple again, and their leaders are using household idols. So I'm not quite sure about that. They didn't ever return to idolatry, because it seems like this is idolatry. But so the teraphim speak iniquity, the diviners seek lying visions and tell false dreams. They comfort in vain. Therefore, the people wander like sheep. They are afflicted because there is no shepherd. These diviners and these false prophets, or these leaders, were using teraphims, or these household gods, for divination. And they were speaking false visions and lying. And they were making the people wander like sheep without a shepherd. God then says in verse 3, my anger is kindled against the shepherds, and I will punish the male goats. Well, what does he mean by that? What does he mean by male goats? Again, I think it's a metaphor, but what does the metaphor mean? Male goats. It's the Hebrew word atud, which means a he-goat, sometimes translated a ram, a male goat. In Isaiah 14, this word is used metaphorically as leaders. And it's probably the same thing here in Zechariah chapter 10, verse 3. Isaiah 14:9, this use of atud there. Shale from beneath is excited over you to meet you when you come. It arouses for you the spirits of the dead, all the leaders of the earth. The word leaders there, that's translated leaders in the NASB, in Isaiah 14:9, is this word atud, the male goats of the earth. It raises all the kings of the nations from their thrones. Also, Jeremiah uses this term figuratively as a simile for the leaders of the people. This is from Jeremiah 50, verse 6 through 8. My people have become lost sheep. Their shepherds have led them astray. They have made them turn aside on the mountains. They have gone along the mountains to hill and have forgotten their resting place. All who came upon them have devoured them, and their adversaries have said, we are not guilty, inasmuch as they have sinned against Yahweh, who is the habitation of righteousness, even Yahweh, the hope of their fathers. Wander away from the midst of Babylon. Go forth from the land of Chaldeans. Be also like male goats as the head of the flock. Now, I don't, there's probably something here with sheep herding and how the male goats would be used to lead the sheep. But in this negative turn, these leaders who are called male goats here were not leading the people anymore. They should have been leading them towards Yahweh, who was their real shepherd for them. Instead, they were leading them away. They were using household idols and false divination and speaking falsely. And they were turning people away from God. And that's what Zechariah is confronting here in this prophecy. And then it says, starting in 3b, for Yahweh of hosts. Now God goes back to himself. Yahweh of hosts has visited his flock, the house of Judah, and I will make them like his majestic horse in battle. God's talking about what he's going to do for them. From them will come the cornerstone, from them the tent peg, from them the bow of battle, from them every ruler, all of them together. They will be as mighty men treading down the enemy in the mire of the streets in the battle, and they will fight, for Yahweh will be with them, and riders on horses will be put to shame. God's saying, look, I'm going to take care of you. This is what I'm going to do. And your leaders are taking you the wrong direction. So we know who the cornerstone is, right? This is a prophecy about Jesus, the tent peg. We know the one that's going to come in the end, that's going to defeat them and bring all the enemies under them. He's going to also be the one that gathers everyone together. This is coming out of Yahweh. This is going to happen, but here, the leaders, the shepherds, the male goats are telling false dreams. They're using teraphims. They're speaking iniquity, and the people are wandering like sheep. One thing on this I wanted to point out here, here in the NASB, this is just for your understanding. He says, from them will come the cornerstone. From them, meaning from the tribe of Judah, will come these things. Is it from them, or other versions say from him? The NET, the ESV, and the REV, rather than saying that the cornerstone is going to come from them, says it's going to come from him, meaning from Yahweh. ESV says that, from him. The REV says it, from him. So I think from what I don't know exactly how this pronoun works here, but I think it could be translated either way. So it could either way it translates, I think it's fine though. If it should be translated that from them, it means from the tribe of Judah, the seed of David. We know that that Jesus came out of the tribe of Judah. He is the cornerstone. He came from them, from Judah. But I also like that it could be from him, meaning it's from Yahweh. From Yahweh is going to come this cornerstone. I think it's from him because he's talking about that he visited his flock. So, but either way works. I think it should be from him, meaning Yahweh is where this cornerstone is going to come from. Then verse 6, God says, continuing on in this vein, I will strengthen the house of Judah. I will save the house of Joseph, and I will bring them back because I have compassion on them, and they will be as though I had not rejected them, for I am Yahweh their God, and I will answer them. Verse 7, Ephraim will be like a mighty man, and their heart will be glad as if from wine. Indeed, their children will see it and be glad. Their heart will rejoice in Yahweh. I will whistle for them to gather them together, for I have redeemed them, and they will be as numerous as they were before. When I scatter them from among the people, they will remember me in far countries, and they will be with their children, will live and come back. I will bring them back from the land of Egypt, from the land of Assyria. I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon until no room can be found for them. He's kind of repeating what he said earlier. And they will pass through the sea of distress, and he will strike the waves in the sea so that all the depths of the Nile will dry up, and the pride of Assyria will be brought down, and the scepter of Egypt will depart, and I will strengthen them in Yahweh, and in his name they will walk, declares Yahweh. Hallelujah. God will shepherd his people, and from this he's going to shepherd them through this cornerstone, who he will bring from the tribe of Judah. And he's going to deliver them and bring them back to the land of Israel. He's going to shepherd them and gather them in from where they have been scattered. Now, let me read chapter 11, and then I'll come back and talk about this because things go downhill here. Zechariah 11:1. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that a fire may feed on your cedars. Wail, O cypress, for the cedar has fallen, because the glorious trees have been destroyed. Wail, O oaks of Bashan, for the impenetrable forest has come down. There is the sound of the shepherd's wail, for their glory is ruined. There is a sound of a young lion's roar, for the pride of Jordan is ruined. Thus says Yahweh, my God, pasture the flock doomed to slaughter. Those who buy them slay them and go unpunished. And each of those who sell them say, Blessed be Yahweh, for I have become rich. And their own shepherds have no pity on them. For I will no longer have pity on the inhabitants of the land, declares Yahweh. But behold, I will cause the men to fall, each of them into another's power, and into the power of his king. And they will strike the land, and I will not deliver them from their power. So I pastured the flock doomed to slaughter, hence the afflicted of the flock, and I took for myself 2 staffs. The one I called favor, and the other I called union. So I pastured the flock. Then, verse 8, I annihilated the 3 shepherds in 1 month, for my soul was impatient with them, and their soul also was weary of me. And then I said, I will not pasture you. What is to die, let it die. What is to be annihilated, let it be annihilated. And let those who are left eat one another's flesh. I took my staff favor and I cut it in pieces to break my covenant, which I had made with all the peoples. So it was broken on that day, and thus the afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized that it was the word of Yahweh. I said to them, if it's good in your sight, give me my wages. But if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. Then Yahweh said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I took the 30 shekels of silver and threw them to the potter in the house of Yahweh. Then I cut in pieces my second staff union to break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. And Yahweh said to me, take again for yourself the equipment of a foolish shepherd. For behold, I am going to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for the perishing, seek the scattered, heal the broken, or sustain the one standing, but will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off their hoofs. Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword will be on his arm, and on his right eye. His arm will be totally withered, and his right eye will be blind. So what does this mean, right? I'll try to explain what I best I understand here. First of all, in these first 3 verses here, it's an interesting thing. I'm not sure about this, but when we were studying this, one of the guys that was studying this with us has a scientific mind, and he knows a lot of things about environment and a lot of things about just the way things work in the world, in the environment, because this before God had said he was going to prosper the land, right? He's going to make it grow, he's going to make it green. Now it's just the opposite. Wail, O cypress of the cedars, have fallen. The glorious trees have been destroyed. Wail, O oaks of Bashan, for the impenetrable forest has come down. There's a sound of the shepherd's wail, for their glory is ruined. There is the sound of the young lion's roar, for the pride of Jordan is ruined. And he pointed this out, which I didn't even think about this, maybe, but I think it's worth mentioning. He said the sound of the young lion's roar, which is a relationship to the sound of the shepherd's wail, almost like the lion is crying. And then it says, for the pride of Jordan is ruined. And I didn't know this, that a group of lions is called a pride. The pride of Jordan is ruined. And he pointed this out, which then I looked it up. I was like, oh my gosh, that's really true. That remember in the Old Testament, like David, Samson came up against the lion and he killed. David came up against and defeated him. The one prophet didn't do what he was said, and the lion got him. There were those kids that were was it Elisha? They were bald head, and then a bear came out and ate all the kids. There were bears and lions in Israel. There's not that anymore. There are no lions in the land of Israel anymore. There's no bears in the land of Israel anymore. It is really pretty desolate, pretty desert-like. Didn't used to be that way. And he was saying he thinks this is a prophecy against that. I thought that was kind of interesting. Again, I'm just putting it out there. Not sure about that, but a very interesting thing. If you look up, I looked up ChatGPT. I said, are there any lions in Israel today? No, but there were definitely ones at one time. But now They don't have the environment to survive there. So anyways, I thought that was interesting. Um, then he goes into this whole thing, pasture the flock doomed to slaughter. Um, and here, these are all these negative connotations against these shepherds. There is a sound of a shepherd's wail. Pasture the flock doomed to slaughter. Their own shepherds have no pity on them. So I pastured the flock doomed to slaughter, hence the afflicted of the flock. Verse 8, he says, Then I annihilated 3 shepherds in 1 month, for my soul was impatient with them. He is confronting the leaders, and that's why I think this may be, what we're looking at here, may be the reason Zechariah was killed. I'm not sure, but when you start talking about the leaders and annihilating them and confronting them, that's what used to get the prophets in trouble. So I'm not sure. Again, speculation, I don't know, but this is pretty harsh against these leaders, against these shepherds at this time when he's writing chapters 9, 10, and 11, when this prophecy came. And I was asking, who are the 3 shepherds? And I thought the REV Bible had a nice footnote about the 3 shepherds that were annihilated. The Hebrew text can be read as the 3 of the shepherds or as the 3 shepherds. There have been centuries of debate as to how the sentence should be translated and what it refers to. And there has never been a totally satisfactory answer set forth. We only know that some shepherds were removed. So, I was wondering, I looked through Ezra and Nehemiah. I was like, can I find the 3 shepherds? Who were these leaders? Who were these shepherds that were annihilated at this time, that were hurting the flock of God? I don't know who they were, but God said he was going to annihilate them. So that's what it says. And then it goes on here in verse 9. God says, I'll not pasture you. What is to die, let it die. What is to be annihilated, let it be annihilated. I took my staff, cut it in pieces, break my covenant. It was broken on that day. The afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized that it was the word of Yahweh. And then comes these verses. I said to them, if it is good in your sight, give me my wages. But if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. And Yahweh said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I took the shekels silver and threw them to the potter in the house of Yahweh. Now, what does that remind you of? I know it reminds me of Judas agreeing for 30 pieces of silver to when he revealed Jesus, right? When he betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. In fact, this is what is quoted in the Gospel of Matthew. And I want to take a look at this because I don't think I ever even looked at this closely until studying the book of Zechariah. But I want to show you this. I'm going to show you a little bit about textual translations and how some of these translations work, because I think it's interesting. But there's a very glaring contradiction, and I want to show you this because Matthew 27 is where this is written that it was fulfilled. And I think when we look at this, it really brings understanding to this whole section of Zechariah. Matthew 27, 3 through 10. It says, then when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that and this is the week, Resurrection Sunday. So we're right in this week of what's happening in our celebration here. Then when Judas who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse. And he returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, what is that to us? See to that yourself. And he threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed. And he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests took the pieces of silver and said, it is not lawful to put them in the temple treasury, since it is the price of blood. And they conferred together, and with the money bought the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of one whose price had been sent by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Now, do you see, now that I've been studying Zechariah, do you see the glaring contradiction in the book of Matthew here? Jeremiah, the prophet. Now, Jeremiah never said anything about 30 pieces of silver and throwing it to the potter's field. There's nothing written in the 50 chapters of Jeremiah where he prophesied this. Zechariah, we're just reading this, is prophesying about this. So what's going on here? So I want to show you a little bit about different ways people have tried to explain this away. I'll give you several options here, and you can decide which you think is the proper thing here. So let me just go through, because I thought this was interesting, how everybody knows Zechariah is the one that said this. Yet they don't know what to do with this here in Matthew, where it's credited to Jeremiah, the prophet. What's written in Zechariah is clear. What's written here in Matthew, not so clear. Jeremiah or Zechariah? This is from the Geneva Bible, and this I thought was interesting. Geneva Bible's old. And it says, seeing this prophecy is read in Zechariah 11:12, it cannot be denied. But Jeremiah's name crept into the text, either through the printer's fault or some other's ignorance. It may be also that it came out of the margin by reason of the abbreviation of the letters, the one being IOU and the other ZOU, which are not much unalike. But in the Syrian text, the prophet's name is not set down at all. I thought that was pretty interesting. They say that it crept in. Something happened and through a printer error. The New Catholic Bible says the following. Spoken through the prophet Jeremiah, the statement actually comes from Zechariah. However, this is their explanation of this. Hebrew canon of the scriptures was divided into 3 sections, the law, the writings, and the prophets. Since Jeremiah came first in the order of the prophetic books, the prophets were at times collectively referred to by his name. I don't know about that. But that's the Catholic Bible's explanation here in Matthew. This is the Revised English Version. And this was that it is spoken. It doesn't say it was written by Jeremiah. It was spoken, not written by Jeremiah or Zechariah, but spoken by Jeremiah. These words are found in Zechariah with allusions to Jeremiah 18 and 19. They are ascribed to Jeremiah since in Jesus' day, the book of prophets were headed by Jeremiah. If you were, Bullinger had the same thing. Bullinger said it's spoken. That was their explanation. That's how you explain it away, that it was spoken. It wasn't written. It was spoken by Jeremiah. And this is the New American Bible. Matthew's attributing this text to Jeremiah is puzzling. It's puzzling, for there is no such text in that book. And the 30 pieces of silver thrown by Judas into the temple recall rather Zechariah. It's usually said that the attribution of the text to Jeremiah is due to Matthew's combining the Zechariah texts with the texts from Jeremiah that speak of a potter, the buying of a field, or the breaking of a potter's flask at Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinnom with the prediction that it becomes a burial place. I don't like that, because it's like saying, so Matthew made a mistake. He got confused. He thought that he was thinking a potter, that's Jeremiah, right? He had a potter's vessel. I don't like that. And then the New English translation has this footnote. The problematic citing of Jeremiah for a text which appears to come from Zechariah has prompted certain scribes to alter it. Codex 22 has Zechariah. So there is one Greek text that has Zechariah. I also looked in my Greek New Testament, and you'll also see that a couple of the church fathers, including Jerome, quoted this as being from Zechariah. So there's more than just one or two of the Greek writings that have Zechariah. But the majority of the Greek texts, overwhelming majority, have Jeremiah, but there are a few that have Zechariah. And it says, in Codex 21 and the Latin manuscript changed the prophet's name to Isaiah in accordance with the natural scribal proclivities to alter the text toward the most prominent Old Testament prophet. And there's some that totally omit the prophet's name, which actually, that one I think is fine. If you don't even say the prophet's name, then it would just say, as according to the prophet, this was spoken. But then this last sentence, this one always bothers me. But unquestionably, I have questions. Unquestionably, the name Jeremiah is the wording of the original here because it is supported by virtually all witnesses and because it is the harder reading. Now, if you've ever read up on these people who write, like the Greek, these guys are the best scholars in the world. I mean, they're incredible scholars. And the ones that did the Greek New Testament, from which really all the modern versions, REV, the NASB, the ESV, the new NASB, all really get their translation out of this, a committee of the best Greek scholars in the world put together this Greek New Testament, and they went through all these places where there were variances, where there's differences in the text, and based on their study, they came up with what they believe is the accurate original Greek text. But this is one of the things which I have a disagreement with Bible translations, and maybe this is just because of my background. If you come from a human point of view, from a scientific point of view, and this is the way they look at it, they say, well, okay, you have 95% of the texts have Jeremiah and only a couple have Zechariah. So therefore, the overwhelming majority, it's going to be Zechariah. And then the other part of this translation theory, and it's only theory, is that if you have that discrepancy, most likely the harder reading is the correct one, because it would make more sense for a scribe to alter the more difficult reading and put in what makes more sense. So that it would make more sense for a scribe to change and put in Zechariah than for a scribe to change and put in Jeremiah. And that's this translation theory that the modern translators use. My problem with that is that I believe that all scripture is inspired by God. I believe that it's perfect. I think that when Matthew wrote the Gospel of Matthew, it was what God wanted written, and it's perfect. So I have a little difficulty with that. To me, it's like, what's the accurate translation? What is the accurate translation? And so then once again, as I mentioned before, whenever I have a discrepancy in the Gospel of Matthew, I pull out my Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. The Hebrew Gospel of Matthew came around 1100 AD from this Jew called Shem Tob, I think his name is. I can't remember the Jewish term, but he had this larger work called the Touchstone, and he was actually refuting Judaism versus Christianity, and he has an entire Hebrew Gospel of Matthew from which he used in this book, and it's very different. I mean, it's not different. I mean, it's same, but you can tell it wasn't taken from the Greek text. I've looked at the Peshitta Aramaic translation and the Aramaic translation, the Peshitta text, the Syriac text, and the English translation from those. And it's pretty much, you can see that those translations of the Syriac and the Aramaic came out of the Greek text. It's pretty clear that the Greek came before those. However, church fathers all acknowledge, pretty much most of them acknowledge, that the original Matthew was not written in Greek, it was not written in Aramaic, but that it was actually written in Hebrew, the original Gospel of Matthew. So I think it's worth looking into what the Gospel of Matthew, the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, was. And George Howard does a very simple translation of it. I recommend getting this book. I only use this when I see discrepancies, and I can tell you, I'd say 75% of the time when I have an issue, I looked at the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. I was like, you know what? I think the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew is right. So what is the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew? Since we're talking about Matthew, what does it say? Well, here on the top is the Hebrew from Matthew 27:9, and on the bottom is the translation. That is the word in the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. It's Zechariah. And then in the translation, the word was fulfilled by Zechariah the prophet. So take that for what it's worth. However you want to try and make sense of you why it says Jeremiah in the English translations of Matthew, I'm going with the Hebrew gospel. That it was Zechariah, that's what Matthew prophesied, and that this is a fulfillment of what we are reading here in Zechariah. And now with that thought in mind, when you look back at this and realize that what you have here is God talking about that he is going to shepherd his people. He is going to do that through his agent, through this cornerstone, this one that is going to shepherd on his behalf. And we know that to be the Messiah, to be Jesus. And God says here in verse 9, I will not pasture you. Like basically he said, well, what they're doing, they're shepherding, they're bringing in divination, they're leading the people astray. And here God's like, I've had it. I'm done. I'm no longer going to shepherd you. I'm not going to pasture you. What is to die, let it die. What is to be annihilated, let it be annihilated. So I took my staff, that's the staff of a shepherd, and I cut it in pieces and break my covenant which I had made with the peoples. So it was broken on that day. Thus the afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized that it was the word of Yahweh. And I said to them, if it's good in your sight, give me my wages. But if not, never mind. In other words, it's like you quit a job, right? And you're like, hey, look, just pay me what you want to, all right? I'm done. I've done this work. Pay me what you think I'm worth. And then I'm done. But if you don't want to pay me, okay, that's what's going on here. God says, I'm done shepherding you. I got my shepherd. You don't like it? I'm done, right? Never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. And Yahweh said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price for which I was valued by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver, threw them to the potter in the house of Yahweh. That's all it was worth to him. That's all that God was worth to him. 30 pieces of silver. That's all this shepherd was worth to him. This one that God was going to shepherd the flock with. Boy, does that make sense with Jesus. Where he was betrayed for the price of 30 pieces of silver. And that's the fulfillment of this in Zechariah. I just think that's cool when you look at it like that. Verse 14, then I cut in pieces my second staff union to break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. And now these last verses, I'm not quite sure what this is talking about, but the Lord, Yahweh said to me, take again for yourself the equipment of a foolish shepherd, verse 15. For behold, I'm going to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for the perishing, will not seek the scattered, not heal the brokenhearted, nor sustain the one standing, but will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off their hoofs. Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword will be on his arm, and on his right eye, his arm will be totally withered, and his right eye will be blind. I have no idea who that's talking about. I don't know if there was someone from this time that is that worthless shepherd. I also wonder, is this talking about the beast at the end of the age? Is that going to be the worthless shepherd that really is the one that ends up devouring and destroying in the end? I don't know. But I'm not sure what that means, but you can take that for yourself. But that's this burden of Yahweh, chapters 9, 10, and 11, ending with this information about the shepherd. So that's the best I understand these chapters. So what can we learn about the time of Haggai and Zechariah? The burden of Yahweh continues here in chapter 10. Although God will shepherd his people, his flock, yet there were diviners and false prophets, leaders using teraphims or household gods for divination. They were speaking false visions and lying, making the people wander like a sheep without a shepherd. Again, Yahweh provides hope that he will shepherd his people through the cornerstone, who he will bring from the tribe of Judah. He will deliver them and bring them back to the land of Israel from wherever they have been scattered. But at the time of this prophecy, the leaders were not shepherding the flock properly, and God would not have pity on them. 3 of those shepherds would be annihilated. And then Yahweh talks of another foolish shepherd coming in the future. What can we learn about future prophecy? I think the simple thing that we see is that prophecy about 30 pieces of silver was fulfilled when Jesus, God's good shepherd, was betrayed for this amount. Also, it prophesies of another foolish shepherd, possibly yet to come. And for us today, when I just thought, well, what do I get out of this? Again, to me, we see the wisdom of God hidden in the prophecy against the shepherds. And now we know the cornerstone has come. Jesus is that good shepherd and knows his sheep. We are to abide in Christ as the sheep of his pasture, listening to his voice as we await his return, when he is going to gather all God's people. He's going to gather all God's flock. He's the agent by which Yahweh is going to bring to pass what he had said he's going to do for his people. He's going to bring the flock together at the end of the age. So there's a little bit about chapters 10 and 11. And next week, next session, session 16, we're going to look at the final 3 chapters, which is about the coming day, in that day, what's going to happen when God comes, and it'll be great. So that'll be the next session, next week, chapters 12, 13, and 14.